Hello, Programa Nosotros viewers. We are here today at the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation's Top 30 Under 30, and with me is the Executive Director, Heather McPherson. Please welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, Heather, for the viewers at home, could you please explain exactly what the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation is and the work that it does in our community?
Of course. So the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation is a coalition of over 70 organizations that are based in Alberta and do international development work, social justice work, human rights, and environmental work in the Global South.
Excellent. And so the initiative that was happening today, the Top 30 Under 30, can you please explain what exactly that is and how it became to be?
Sure. Well, it's International Development Week right now, which is an opportunity for organizations and individuals interested and involved in international development to celebrate the accomplishments that we've made and to really acknowledge the important work that needs to be done in international development. And what ACGC does during International Development Week is we solicit nominations for young people who are making a difference around the world. We select 30. They all have to be under 30. That's our sort of, I guess, our line. And then we honor them in a magazine. So we do it for a few different reasons. First of all, it's important that you acknowledge the important work that young people are doing around the world. Often we fail to recognize young people, and we fail to really acknowledge the important contribution they make to international development. But secondly, it gives other youth an opportunity to learn how they could be involved. So the only solution to a lot of the problems that we're facing would be to have lots of youth involved, more and more people understanding what's happening, more and more young people. And this magazine honors those who are doing great work, but it also gives opportunities to youth that don't know how to get involved or are looking for ways to get more involved in human rights and social justice issues.
And so we do have a lot of young viewers. And so what would your advice be to those viewers? How do you encourage a young person to get involved when they may not exactly know where to start or how to become involved?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, you have to find your passion. So there's a lot of different areas that you can work in. You know, there is international development, there is human rights, there is the environmental justice, climate change. You know, there's just such a wide range of areas you can be passionate about. And I think once you select that, then you really need to learn about it. You really need to learn more. And there's ways to do that. I mean, we're in a digital age. You can find that out on the internet. But you can talk to people, too. We've got a great community in Alberta of activists, of people that are super involved in social justice. So find that network. Find those communities. That's the best way to get involved, I think.
And it's amazing to see today the passion of the youth. Yeah. It was incredible to hear them speak, and we had an interview with two of the students. So the passion definitely exists, and it's wonderful to see all the youth come out today. And we do, like I said, we have a lot of young viewers and a lot of viewers with Latin American connections. Mm-hmm. So could you speak about some of the projects that the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation is working on, or what would be appropriate development projects that in Latin America during this time?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the Alberta Council doesn't actually do on-the-ground development. We support organizations, so we are a coalition of organizations that actually do the groundwork. And all of our members adhere to a code of ethics that outlines good development practices, and many of our members adhere to what's called the Istanbul Principles. So these are new development principles. They're not new principles. They're newly articulated, I guess, and primarily working with the community. So the key thing is this idea that this is not charity, this is rights-based development. That's what's important. Working with the community, making sure that it's a partnership, a true partnership, and that's how development is being approached. And it's a continuum, so people are getting it to certain degrees, but I think in Central and South America, that understanding, I mean, that's where it started. That's where a lot of the idea of conscientization, which never sounds as good in English as it does in Spanish, that's where it began. So I think this idea that you really need to have the community involved is the key for development, particularly in Latin America.
Okay, and it was great to see a good percentage of the youth that were honored today have connections to Latin America. Is that a growing trend you see, or is that something that's always been in Edmonton?
I think it's always been that way in Edmonton, and I certainly think that Latin America has always been really well represented in terms of activists and in terms of committed individuals that are involved in the community, both in terms of supporting Latin America, but also in a whole range of other issues and other activities.
Okay. Excellent. And so where can some of our viewers find more information about the Top 30 Under 30?
Well, they can go to the ACGC website. It's www.acgc.ca. It is all over the city. We've dispersed it all over the place, but if you do want a digital copy, the website's the best place to go.
Okay. Well, we will be on the lookout for that, and we really appreciate you speaking with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hola a todos y bienvenidos al programa Nosotros. Mi nombre es Jenny y me encuentro aquí con una de las 30 personas que es parte del Top 30 Under 30. ¿Cuál es tu nombre y cuéntanos un poco tu experiencia?
My name is Dallas McElhenney. I guess I have this honor because a year ago I went to Nicaragua through Change for Children. I went on a brigade where I was introduced to some of the project works that they do in the indigenous region in the north, and also in rural communities where they have sponsored wells to be built, and they're doing lots of projects in schools. So through them I was introduced to an organization that does artwork with children at risk, youth and children.
Okay.
And I started on a project where I was able to work in schools to help with the self-esteem of children and families that were affected by a tropical depression. So I wrote and performed a puppet show in Spanish to teach the children how to protect themselves, but also how to give them a safe space where they could feel comfortable talking about their experience. So that was my experience in Nicaragua.
Discúlpame. Ahora que estás en Canadá, ¿sigues en contacto con las personas que conociste en Nicaragua?
Sí, yeah, still I'm in contact with my friends, my Nicaraguan family. I try to do all I can still for them, because when you're in Nicaragua, you feel the passion of the people, and that stays with you. So since I've been back, I have been helping through Change for Children, because they're very connected with Nicaragua. Mm-hmm. So I've been helping with presentations. Actually, the indigenous leader from Nicaragua came up for a month. He was here and I helped him do presentations in schools, talking about the project, about the challenges they face in the indigenous community of Bosowas. So they were also interviewed on Programa Nosotros in Septiembre. And also now I am presenting in schools about the challenges in rural communities with water and sanitation, and teaching students about what's going on, what's the reality of what's going on in these communities, and how to create a sustainable project through communication with community members, and finding what is the biggest challenges and what we can do in Canada to help the Global South.
¿Cuáles son los más challenges que tuviste, los más difíciles, o qué es lo que tuviste que sobrepasar para adaptarte, por ejemplo?
Sí. Yeah. The life in Nicaragua is very different from here, of course. The first 2 weeks I was traveling around and saw a lot of different regions. So being in the indigenous reserve in the Bosowas rainforest, it's a very isolated region where you have to travel for 2 days, part of it a full day in a boat to reach the region. There's no roads. Just very
first experience for you to travel like in a boat
like that. Yeah, absolutely. It was experiencing the culture and getting to know the people there. I wish I would have spoke better Spanish at the time to get to know them. So that was a major challenge, the language. Especially after that, I moved to a city, Esteli, where I then worked with Funarte, the organization there, a local organization. And life was, of course, a little bit more comfortable being in a city, but still very different from here.
Yeah.
And then everybody at the organization only spoke Spanish, and I had to teach in Spanish, so I learned very quickly. In 5 months, I wrote the puppet show in Spanish and spoke to the kids in Spanish.
You planning to travel to other countries in South America or maybe in Europe, or I don't know?
Yeah, I love traveling, of course, but when I was in Nicaragua, I really realized that you really need to understand the culture and to be able to communicate in the language, to be able to use your skills to help what a local organization is trying to do. So for me to return to Nicaragua, I'm working on my Spanish right now so that I can help more. And now that I understand the culture, it's easier. So I think I would return to Nicaragua. But that's one thing that I learned, was that you can help better at home where you understand the culture. And right now I'm really concentrating on working in schools in Edmonton and doing what I can here to teach youth about what issues are in the global south, what issues there are, and what they can do to support. Because I understand the culture here, and I think I can be more effective in my own community.
Yeah, that's very good. And ¿qué le aconsejarías a una persona que quisiera hacer lo mismo que tú, por ejemplo?
Yeah, the same things. Like, if you're going to go somewhere, learn the language, understand the culture, but also absorb yourself in the culture. Get to know the people, ask about everything, try to understand why things are the way they are. Because, of course, if they're different, you can have initial impressions and you can really misunderstand things. So only when we can communicate and understand what the issues are can we decide on a way to help each other and to achieve the goals that we need to. So that's...
Muchas gracias y felicitaciones.
Gracias.
Gracias. Aquí estamos con Tiffany, que es otra de las participantes del Top 30 Under 30. Explícanos, ¿qué te impulsó a ir a México? Porque me estabas contando que fuiste a México.
Así, pues en 2004 ya me fui a México para aprender español y hay más que necesito aprender, pero ya puedo hablar un poquito. Y estuve parte de un programa que se llama Intercambio Desarrollo Rural y estuvimos en México por 4 meses y en Canadá por 4 meses con 10 canadienses y 10 mexicanos.
Perfecto. ¿Qué es lo que te impulsó? ¿Qué es lo que te llamó la atención para ir allá y hacer, aprender español? Pero aparte de eso, ¿otra cosa?
Me interesa mucho que pasó en cada comunidad en México. Fue muy similar a que pasó aquí en Canadá. Okay. En muchos lados somos el mismo. Todos necesitan una casa, seguridad en la familia, paz, comida, agua pura. Y por eso, antes de este programa, en 2004, yo continué mis estudios en desarrollo. Por eso estoy trabajando en este tipo de trabajo.
¿Cuáles son los challenges que tuviste que sobremontar así y que tuviste que sobrepasar?
A mí es que todos en todo el mundo necesitan entender que somos juntos. No hay un país en todo el mundo que puede decir ya estamos separados. Ya. Eso no importa a nosotros. No existe. Siempre hay conexiones por todo, en todos lados, todos tipos de ideas.
¿Qué le dirías a una persona que quisiera participar en este tipo de programa? ¿qué serían los consejos que le darías a una persona que quisiera hacer lo mismo que tú?
Pues principalmente ya aprender, necesitan aprender las lenguas. A mí también, ya quiero estudiar un poco más. Español y también las lenguas indígenas. Cuando estuve en Guatemala hay como 24 lenguas de las mayas.
Sí.
Dios santo.
Eso es solo en Nicaragua. ¿Te imaginas en cada país?
Oh, wow. Y esa diversidad es muy rico, es importante. Entonces, ya aprender las lenguas. Escucha siempre a las películas, a cada persona quien puede conocer aquí en la calle. Ya hacer preguntas. ¿Qué importa? ¿Qué pasa en su país? ¿Qué interesa? Eso importa mucho.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Y felicitaciones por el Top 30.
Gracias.
Hola amigos, mi nombre es Luis Aliaga y me encuentro en este momento en el Centro de Información Turística que está en el sur de la ciudad. Este mes tenemos el concierto de Billy Talent e igualmente se celebra el Día Internacional de la Mujer el 8 de marzo. Si deseas saber más sobre eventos, quédese con nosotros. Cine.
You can tear and jeer. All we want to say is laugh. Yet we are here on the screen. Bonjour, Paris.
Tengo un armario mágico con una llave mágica. Pongo un indio de plástico en él y se vuelve vivo. Si eres de verdad.
Sí. Igualmente en este lugar pueden encontrar información sobre las actividades y eventos que pueden hacer durante todo el año. En estos momentos me encuentro en la tienda de souvenirs, donde pueden comprar playeras, vasos, juguetes, peluches y también cartas postales si desean enviar a los familiares al extranjero o que están cerca. Igualmente nos pueden escribir a calendariocomunitarionosotros@gmail.com. Eventos.
Then the spell would be broken. But if not, he would be doomed to remain a...
À force de rester dans la forêt à s'ennuyer, le diable est venu les tenter. Il fallait 2 semaines même quand la glace était en allée, en canot pour s'en retourner. C'était déjà l'hiver, les grands froids nous mordaient les pieds. Imposible de s'en aller.
Y en el teatro tenemos igualmente Billy Elliot Musical y The Beauty and the Beast. No se olviden de sintonizarnos en 15 días. Adiós.
Hasta la vista, baby.
tomando en cuenta los últimos sucesos. En la poesía quisiera preguntar, me urge, ¿qué tipo de adjetivo?
Okay. Well, I'd like to point out, first of all, that the temporary foreign worker is really a fairly recent kind of program. Historically, people have always come to Canada with permanent residency rights. And it's only since the 1970s when we had the agricultural workers and domestic living caregivers and that we started introducing this idea of temporary foreign workers. And one of the biggest changes was in 2002 when the government opened up the program to include low-skilled workers. And that really changed the very nature of the program, because up until that point, the foreign worker program was used for the agricultural workers, of course, and for highly skilled people who were coming to Canada to work for a year, like visiting professors or engineers, and then they would leave. But in 2002, they started using the temporary foreign worker program as sort of an immigration type of program for skilled workers, and they opened up that program for low-skilled workers. And of course, in the 70s, our immigration system had changed, and under our federal immigration system, low-skilled workers or people who are working in low-skilled jobs cannot immigrate to Canada. So that temporary foreign worker program is fairly new. Basically what it is that the government gives a person a permit to come and stay in Canada. They can stay for the length of time that the permit is valid, but they can only work for the people or the person or the job that is set out in the work permit. So if you get a work permit for 1 year, you can stay in Canada for that year, but you cannot work for anybody else or in any other job except for what is set down in your work permit. Well, yes, you can apply to extend work permits with one limitation. I'll talk about that in a minute. And there's a process for that. An employer, before they can hire a temporary foreign worker, must get a labor market opinion. And once they get that, then the worker can apply for either a new work permit or an extension. So if a temporary foreign worker is in Canada, they can apply to extend and stay with the same employer. Or if they lose their job or their employment isn't working out, they can find a new employer and apply for a new work permit. As long as, of course, they still have status in Canada. Once that old work permit runs out, they don't have any status in Canada and they have to leave. As I said a little earlier, we became very elitist in Canada back in the 70s. And our whole immigration program is geared towards skilled workers and skilled work. And you'll see that if you're trying to figure out what's skilled and what isn't, it's under the National Occupational Classification Code. And you Google that and you'll find out what is considered skilled or not. But half of our temporary foreign workers in Canada, about half, are in low-skilled jobs. And under the federal immigration program, they have absolutely no ability to apply for permanent residency. Only skilled workers can. And I should mention one other thing, because this really affects the low-skilled people, is we passed a new regulation in 2011 that said, as a foreign worker, you can only stay in Canada for 4 years. That's it. So you can renew up to 4 years, but after 4 years, you can't renew and you must leave Canada. And the current regulation says you cannot come back for another 4 years. So, of course, that hits primarily the low-skilled people, because the skilled workers can apply for permanent residency while they're here working. Well, if they're having problems at work, that's a very difficult situation, because right now, if they complained to the government, like employment standards, for example, if they're not being paid overtime, which happens very often, and they filed a complaint with employment standards, well, the employer can fire them, and there's nothing they can do about that. And because our system is so bogged down, even if you got a new employer right away, it would take you almost 3 months to get a brand new work permit. So what's a temporary foreign worker supposed to do for 3 or 4 months while they're trying to get a new work permit? You know, there's no social services for them. They can't apply for social assistance. So typically, my advice is to, keep a record of everything that happens, make notes, keep records, get advice, and look for a new job. There are a number of places people can go for help. We run 2 clinics a month at the Edmonton Community Legal Center for temporary foreign workers. Plus, we have clinics every week. So if a foreign worker has a problem at work, they can get employment advice at our clinics. So that's one place. In Calgary, we have the Calgary Legal Guidance Center, and they also provide assistance to people, and that's, of course, free of charge. There's also the Temporary Foreign Worker Advisory Office, and you can go and ask them for help too. I hear that a lot. Employers are telling temporary foreign workers, if you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to send you back. It's not true.
They do not have the power to do that.
They do not have the power to do that. When a worker gets a work permit, it says on that work permit there's an expiry date. That worker, it doesn't matter what happens to the job. If they get fired, laid off, quit, doesn't matter. That worker has the legal right to stay in Canada until that expiry date. Immigration does not cancel work permits. So that work permit never gets canceled. So they have the right to stay and to look for another job. So, and if I have come across situations where employers have tried to drive people to the airport, that's kidnapping. And you can call the police if you think, if the employer is trying to force you to leave, people should be phoning the police. That's correct. It's not legal. Temporary foreign workers who are injured on the job in Canada are entitled to workers' compensation. So they are indeed entitled to full medical care and follow-up care under workers' compensation. Again, it's a situation if the employer is putting them on the airplane, they're being kidnapped. And that isn't allowed. It's a problem that we come across. So it is, I've also been told of people who are being driven to airports after a workplace injury and being sent away. If you know of somebody who's in that situation, even if they are outside of the country, they should be filing a workers' compensation claim. Just because they have been kidnapped, and people should be calling the police, because it really is kidnapping to force somebody to leave when they don't have to. Tell the truth. They have to tell their doctors or the hospital the truth about what happened. Because even if it seems like a minor injury, if you say, well, no, it happened at home, I fell at home instead of falling at work. What happens if you need an operation in a year to fix a problem? You know, even if you can work for another half year or so, if you don't have a record that the accident happened at work, you're going to have a problem. So. A lot of things. Probably the most important thing is that if you're coming here to work in a low-skilled job, your options to become a permanent resident are very, very small. That's the first thing, because I know most of the foreign workers I've met believe that they can apply for permanent residency, and it's just not true. The second thing is that I think most foreign workers have the idea that they can make a lot of money in Canada. And while $11 may sound like a lot of money if you're in the Philippines and unemployed, $11 an hour, when you have a family to support, is well below poverty line in Canada. And people aren't being told what the cost of living is in Edmonton and what the living conditions are when you're making $11 an hour. Well, I think the most important thing is that the employer can't send you home. We've talked about that. You have status to be here. I think the permanent residency is really important. The other thing is that temporary foreign workers do have most of the same rights that other Canadian workers have. For example, if you've worked for a number of weeks in Canada and you've paid employment insurance, you have the right to apply for and get employment insurance if you're laid off, for example. Or if you go on maternity leave, you have the right to employment insurance. You have the right to workers' compensation. You have the right under employment standards. You have all the rights that other workers have, including when you first got your job, you would have signed, if you're a low-skilled worker, you would have signed a contract of employment that says you get paid so much money, an hour, even though it might be more than minimum wage. Well, employment standards will enforce that. So if your employer didn't pay you what they were supposed to, then you can make a complaint under employment standards and hopefully get that money back. No, they can't, because again, that would be in effect human trafficking in a sense. However, the problem is, and this is what's so frustrating about this temporary foreign worker program, this kind of thing happens all the time. And you know what happens when the workers say, no, we'd rather live on our own, or we found some good housing somewhere else? They get fired. And what can you do? Government doesn't care. They don't care. Because not one of those employers that I've had to deal with has been stopped from hiring more temporary foreign workers. And in the meantime, what all that foreign worker can do is sue. Well, that's not a very good remedy. Basically, the problem is that the temporary foreign worker program is a form of slavery. Because you've got a work permit that says you cannot work for anybody else except company ABC in this location, by the way, and in this job, the employer now has complete control over you. Complete control. So, you can say, I don't like it, you can complain, and then the employer fires you. Well, that's nice. Now what? You're going to sit there for 4 to 6 months before you can legally work again. So the people who pay are the workers. The employers never have to pay. The example I like to use is an employer who had a number of fast food outlets, and one of his foreign workers, her permit said you can work in this location, and he wanted her to work in a different location. She said, well, I can't. My work permit said. He said, well, you want a job? You have to work there. So the border police came to check. They like to check fast food places because it's easy. They found her. She's working somewhere where the work permit says she can't. So who pays for that? The worker. The worker got deported. Did the employer get charged? No. So our whole system has become one of exploiting workers and punishing them and letting employers and recruiters go scot-free. So it's really, and you do have some good employers, but personally, I think I would say at least half, if not more, employers exploit temporary foreign workers. No, because the whole system is about just using your labor. We do not care about the people. So temporary foreign workers are not allowed to enroll in any educational program. Now, the rationale for that is supposed to be, look, you're only coming to do a particular job because no Canadian can do it. Or at least that's supposed to be what happens. So if we let you get education, well, we may have Canadians with that education, right? And that's the so-called rationale for it. There's a lot of problems with human rights issues too. It is against the law to discriminate on the basis of gender, and that includes issues like pregnancy. Under employment standards, if you've worked for an employer for at least 1 year, then the employer must give you maternity leave and must hire you back, and that's often a problem. I've heard many stories of people not getting their jobs back. That's a human rights complaint as well as an employment standards complaint. And that's something we don't see very much of, is foreign workers aren't making human rights complaints. But there's certainly a lot of cases where the foreign workers are being treated very differently from the Canadian workers. And that is just fundamentally wrong. Of course not. Because if you did that, and you would be, in effect, engaging in human trafficking. It's, issues like taking away a passport, taking away somebody's right to where they can live, what they can do outside of work. Those are all aspects of human trafficking. And we do have, unfortunately, many cases of that with temporary foreign workers. And I think the police are just realizing that that's happening with foreign workers. It's not just, historically they always thought of human trafficking in terms of sex trade workers. But we've had lots of cases across Canada of temporary foreign workers, in various jobs. Yes, it's illegal. The Employment Standards Code requires that you get a statement of what you're paid and what the deductions from your pay are. If you're not getting anything, then I'm guessing that you might not be paying taxes, you might not be paying Employment Insurance Canada pension. So what a worker should do, here's a good thing to do in that kind of case, is phone up Revenue Canada and find out if the employer is paying taxes on your behalf. That would be one good step. And again, keep records, look for another job, because clearly that employer is breaking the law. You need to keep a good record of what money you are getting. I also come across cases where people are getting a paycheck and the employer goes with the person to the bank, makes them cash the paycheck and gives some of the money back. When that happens, again, the person should be writing down right away. The same day it happens, you have to make these notes. What happened, how much they gave back, those kinds of things. And then if you come to like the Edmonton Community Legal Center, we might be able to help. I won't guarantee anything, you know that, but at least then if you've got records, it really does help a lot. That's a really difficult question. Under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, if you're working in a low-skill job, the employer must pay airfare from your country and back to your country. Of course, the problem is, how do you enforce it? And as long as you're working, again, it's one of those questions of, if you keep asking for it, will you get fired, right? Again, it's one of those things, keep records, find another employer who is doing things legally, and you can sue, and the legal center will help you sue to get that money back. Absolutely. Absolutely. They can't work somewhere else without a new work permit, but they can certainly look for another job. Definitely.
Can you tell us a phone number to contact the
Okay, the Edmonton Community Legal Center phone number is 780-702-1725.
Is there, like, we can contact you, or there's a lot of people can help?
The people at reception will take the message, and they book the clinics that I go to. So, and if there's something urgent, because we only have 2 clinics a month, but if there's something urgent, they can come and see another lawyer. Like we run every week, we have legal clinics in the evenings. So. Absolutely. Yes. There's some excellent organizations in Alberta that help temporary farm workers, and that is, I must give credit to the Alberta government for funding those organizations. In Edmonton, it's Catholic Social Services that provides that, and I believe until the end of March, the Edmonton Mennonite Center is providing some assistance too, but that will be ending. And in Catholic Social Services also has programs in Calgary, Red Deer, not in Brooks. There's also a program in Brooks, though, and I think it's with Catholic Social Services. But that's who I would contact to see where the closest office is that helps out farm workers.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm glad you brought that up. The Catholic, yeah, no, absolutely. And they've got, the people here in Edmonton are just fabulous. It really is really important for people to keep records, because if you do keep a record, we might be able to help.
El poema de un barco sin que se haga sentimental, fuera de la vanguardia o evidente panfleto. Si debo usar palabras como flota cubana de pesca y playa Girón.
En el 32 quisieron entrar varios partidos políticos, ¿no? A financiar, a cooptar ese movimiento, porque realmente era de muchísima influencia. Entonces quieren entrar a partidos políticos, pero el movimiento se genera como apartidista, ¿no? Entonces dicen, no queremos partidos políticos que metan sus manos sucias al movimiento y al final acaben pues, despedazándolo, ¿no? Porque parecía que era una oportunidad real para un cambio social.
Creemos que en las circunstancias políticas actuales, el abstencionismo y el voto nulo son acciones ineficaces para avanzar en la construcción de nuestra democracia.
Somos un movimiento preocupado por la democratización del país y por lo cual creemos que un bien necesario para ella es la democratización de los medios de comunicación. Esta preocupación se deriva de la prensa actual y de los medios de comunicación en pocas manos.
Segundo, Yo Soy 132. Es un movimiento incluyente que no representa a una sola universidad.
Su representación depende únicamente de las personas que se suman a esta causa y que está articulada a través de los comités universitarios.
El movimiento Yo Soy 132, a través de la deliberación interuniversitaria democrática, cuenta ya con principios generales que guían su causa, así como estatutos que aseguran la participación de las personas y de los grupos que los hacen suyos.
En esencia, nuestro movimiento busca la democratización de los medios de comunicación, con el fin de garantizar información transparente, plural e imparcial, para fomentar una conciencia y pensamiento crítico. Es por ello que
exigimos competencia real en el sector de los medios de comunicación, en particular a lo referente al duopolio televisivo constituido por Televisa y TV Azteca.
Exigimos hacer del acceso a Internet un derecho constitucional efectivo, en los términos que establece el artículo 1 de nuestra Carta Magna.
Exigimos la instauración en todos los medios informativos, radio, televisión y prensa, de instrumentos que aseguren el interés social en los contenidos.
Exigimos someter a concurso las producciones de los canales públicos de permisionarios en las distintas escuelas de comunicación.
Exigimos abrir espacios de debate entre los jóvenes y los medios de comunicación sobre las demandas aquí expuestas.
Exigimos garantizar la seguridad de los integrantes de este movimiento, de quienes se expresan libremente a lo largo del país, y en particular de los periodistas.
Todos aquí somos estudiantes y todos queremos la apertura de la conciencia crítica de la ciudadanía y no más mentiras. Queremos la verdad en la televisión y en noticiarios.
Los líderes del movimiento tienen que buscar pues las tarimas, las bocinas, todas estas cosas, ¿no? Y empiezan a buscar subsidio, ¿no? Muchas de este subsidio lo otorga, pues no sé, la misma gente dentro del movimiento. Realmente ellos pedían en una cuenta bancaria que depositaran y la misma sociedad es la que empieza a fomentar y a generar eso. Y por ejemplo, en la última Asamblea Nacional, lo que me pude percatar también es de que ellos piden que cada quien lleve sus platos, sus vasos, sus cubiertos, que deben llevar una cooperación de 50 pesos para ir a este foro. Se percibe es de que es un movimiento realmente que no tiene un subsidio de ningún partido político, de ningún sector empresarial, de ningún lado, o sea, los únicos que llevan a cabo este movimiento son los integrantes del movimiento, ¿no? Los que realmente piensan que sí puede dar un cambio o puede generar algo. ¿No?
Porque cuando la sociedad despierte y cuando la sociedad esté viendo lo que está pasando y tenga la información correcta, la sociedad va a poder actuar congruentemente y coherentemente con lo que necesita el país. Ese es nuestro sentir. Sabemos que hay muchas cosas que están mal.
¿Tú crees que el movimiento vaya a llegar al próximo sexenio?
No, yo no creo que pueda llegar al próximo sexenio por el mismo aspecto, ¿no? que te mencionaba. Ahorita están en un declive así muy grande. Estamos viendo que 300 personas para 2 días, alrededor de 150 personas las que fueron por cada día. Y dentro de estas 150 personas podemos ver que un 70% a lo mejor fueron observadores, que son alumnos de escuelas que dijeron, pues quiero ver qué pasa con el movimiento, y un 30% son personas participativas dentro de las asambleas, ¿no? que proponen, que quieren hacer algo. Pero estas personas no van a alcanzar para poder desarrollar algo. Vamos a ver el impacto que tiene su campaña, ¿no? La de la protesta, en pro de la protesta. Pero yo creo que va a tener un buen impacto a nivel... Pues, mira, fíjate que yo no encuentro que haya habido un fraude. Hubo aspectos ilegales, ¿no? Como el rebaso del tope de campaña por parte del PRI, como el Soriana's Gate, que le llaman, y como muchas de estos asuntos, ¿no? Pero que en México son muy comunes y no los toman como aspectos fraudulentos realmente, ¿no? Lo que pasó en 2006 sí fue muy distinto a lo que pasó en el 2012. En el 2006 sí hay gente que dice haber trabajado en estas instancias y dice que hubo fraude, ¿no? No sé, esa es como la...
Pero ahora todavía no sale.
Tengo en mi mano 4 tarjetas que fueron dadas por los distritos que maneja en el distrito, en Nezahualcóyotl, el PRI. Esta es una, ¿cómo se dice?, prueba fehaciente de que sí hubo voto comprado.
Hay gente que dice que se le dieron las tarjetas de Soriana.
Claro.
Tú qué, o sea, en base a todo lo que has visto y has escuchado, ¿es sociedad o es gobierno?
Yo creo que es sociedad. El pueblo merece al gobierno que tiene. Es penoso y todo, pero creo que el problema real está en la sociedad, porque la sociedad no está politizada, la sociedad no tiene una educación política, la sociedad está inmersa en una educación muy baja y no tiene ganas de conocer o de aprender o de querer saber más, ¿no? Se mantiene simplemente y muchas veces va conforme la ola, ¿no? O conforme la moda o conforme lo que digan los demás. No hay un análisis real ni profundo sobre el gobierno, sobre la política, sobre las leyes, sobre qué es lo que repercute en cada uno.
De música, tomando en cuenta esas politonales y audaces canciones, quisiera preguntar, me urge, ¿qué tipo de armonía se debe usar para hacer la canción de este barco con hombres de poca niñez? Hombres y solamente hombres sobre cubierta, hombres negros y rojos y azules, los hombres que pueblan el Playa Girón. Compañeros de historia, tomando en cuenta lo implacable que debe ser la verdad, quisiera preguntar, me urge tanto que debiera decir qué fronteras debo respetar. Si alguien roba comida y después da la vida, ¿qué hacer? ¿Hasta dónde debemos practicar las verdades? ¿Hasta dónde sabemos que escriban